Have you ever found yourself at a point in a relationship wondering if you really are still a priority? Being a priority is one of the important things in a relationship, but there comes a time when you can feel that this priority has been lost. This feeling can appear little by little, with small signs that you may not want to notice, but something is clear. You are no longer a priority. Look, let's be honest. There's no worse feeling than realizing that you're no longer a priority in your relationship, right? That good phase when everything seemed to flow suddenly begins to cool down. The attention, the affection, the conversations, everything changes. And then you think, where did I go wrong? But wait a minute. Before you start blaming yourself, let's take a deep breath and understand what's going on. Let's talk about what to do when you realize that you're no longer at the top of your partner's list. To begin with, we need to learn to recognize when things are going wrong. Sometimes we're so involved in the relationship that we don't realize right away that we're no longer a priority. And that's normal, you know? We get used to the routine, the days go by, and the little signs end up seeming like things of life. But come on, you have to be realistic. When you start to feel that your partner's time for you has diminished, that's a warning sign. Imagine that you used to spend hours talking about everything and nothing, and now it seems that every time you try to strike up a conversation, the answer is short, cold, or worse. Just, okay. That hurts, doesn't it? Because deep down you feel that something has changed. The excuses start to appear. I'm tired, it's been a hard day, I don't have the mind for it right now, and so on. Of course, everyone has bad days, but when those bad days turn into weeks or months, something is wrong. Another sign that can't be ignored is the distancing of important decisions. Like, what used to be decided by the two of you, now it seems that you only hear about it afterwards. It's as if your opinion no longer matters. Whether it's about a trip, a purchase, or even something as simple as choosing what to watch at the weekend, you realize that you're being left out of the equation. And that hurts. Recognizing these signs is essential. But more than that, it's important not to ignore them. Sometimes we're afraid to confront reality because admitting that something is wrong is uncomfortable. But you know what's more uncomfortable? Living in a relationship where you are no longer a priority and pretending that everything is fine. It's not your fault. Now let's talk about something that happens a lot. Self-sabotage. When we realize that we are no longer a priority, the first impulse is to think that it's our fault. This happens because we are conditioned to think that if something has gone wrong, we have to be responsible. But wait a minute. Life isn't like that, is it? If you start to fall into the trap of thinking that the problem lies with you, you'll enter an endless cycle of insecurity. You start questioning every detail. Am I boring? Am I no longer attractive? What did I do wrong? And that, my friend, leads nowhere. It only makes matters worse. The point here is, every relationship is made up of two people, and changes in the other person's behavior don't always have to do with you. It could be that the other person is going through problems, has changed their priorities because of work, family, or even internal issues that they don't know how to deal with. But that doesn't mean it's your fault. Blaming yourself for something that is not in your control will only waste more energy. Instead of spending that time beating yourself up, it's better to start looking at yourself in a gentler way. We all have our ups and downs, and we won't always be perfect. But being perfect is not a prerequisite for being loved, okay? Speak up. Now that you've identified the signs and stopped blaming yourself, I hope the next step is communication. Yes, I know that many people find it difficult to open up, especially when the subject is delicate. But if you keep it to yourself, it's only going to get worse. Talking about what's bothering you isn't synonymous with fighting, okay? It is possible to have an honest conversation without turning everything into a battlefield. But in order to do that, you need to be ready to talk without putting all the blame on the other person. It sounds contradictory, but it's not. The tip here is very practical. Instead of saying, "You never pay attention to me," try, "I feel like we've been drifting apart, and that makes me sad." See the difference? When you put your feelings on the table, the conversation takes on a more human, vulnerable tone. And man, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. Showing that you care enough to expose your feelings is one of the most powerful ways of trying to save a relationship. If the other person cares, they'll listen. If he listens and does nothing, that's another point, but we'll talk about that later. The important thing here is that you take the first step, open your heart, and make it clear how you feel. If the other person doesn't know you're upset, how can they improve? What if the person doesn't change? This is where the dilemma begins. You've identified the signs, communicated, put your feelings on the table, and nothing has changed. Now what? Well, that's the tricky part. Because the truth is that in a relationship, no matter how hard you try, the other person won't always react the way you'd like. And then you have an important choice to make. The first thing you need to understand is that no one can force someone else to prioritize you. Priority is a choice. And if the other person, even knowing how you feel, isn't willing to change their behavior, you need to ask yourself, am I willing to continue like this? Because deep down, continuing in a relationship where you are not a priority will wear you down emotionally, and that can sink you even further. Often, the fear of being alone makes us accept crumbs of attention. We convince ourselves that this is better than nothing. But is it really? Is it worth living in the shadow of a relationship where you are second best? If the person doesn't change, you have to start thinking about what's best for you. And sometimes the best thing to do is to move on. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because at the end of the day, you deserve more than being someone's last priority. Rediscover your individuality. Look, after realizing that the relationship is no longer on the same level and having that honest conversation, there comes a crucial moment. You need to reconnect with yourself. Yes, this is very important. Because when we're in a relationship, it's common to let go of some of the things that used to make us happy individually. We end up focusing so much on us that we forget about me. So the question that remains is, who are you outside of this relationship? What do you enjoy doing? What makes you happy? Sometimes when we stop being a priority, we become so focused on trying to get the other person's attention that we forget to take care of ourselves. And that only makes matters worse. It's like trying to save a leaky boat without stopping rowing. So the tip is, stop for a moment, reflect on what makes you happy outside the relationship. What have you been neglecting? It could be a hobby you used to love, a personal goal that has been forgotten, or even friendships that you no longer cultivate. Get back to doing these things. Invest in your time, in your happiness. Rediscovering your individuality is an act of self-love. And believe me, when you focus on yourself again, the other person feels the change too. The energy changes, you become more interesting, more confident, and that in itself can turn the relationship around. But if it doesn't, at least you're recovering your own essence. Accepting reality is liberating. Let's agree on one thing. Accepting reality can be painful, but it's also the most liberating thing you can do for yourself. We spend so much time trying to fix what's broken, holding on to crumbs of affection, that we end up forgetting that we deserve more. Accepting that the other person won't prioritize you is hard. It's that famous emotional beating that nobody wants to take. But when you stop fighting the current and accept the facts as they are, you start to see things more clearly. You know that saying, there's no point punching a knife? That's exactly what it is. Continuing to try to force a situation that clearly isn't working will only cause you more pain. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up on the other person. It means giving up suffering by trying to change what doesn't depend on you. It means recognizing that, however much you love them, they're not always on the same wavelength. And that's okay. Acceptance is the first step towards healing. And look, when you accept reality, you make room for new possibilities, whether it's reconciliation with the person, a change of perspective, or in some cases, even the end of the relationship. The important thing is that you stop suffering in vain and start looking for real solutions. Now that you've accepted what's going on, it's time to put the focus where it really needs to be. On you. That's right, it's time to put yourself first. And hey, it's not selfish, okay? Many people think that prioritizing yourself is a sign of selfishness, but it's quite the opposite. You can't offer others what you don't have inside yourself. When you prioritize your own happiness and well-being, the rest starts to fall into place. Healthy relationships are born from emotionally healthy people. So if you're feeling undervalued, it's time to look inwards and start taking real care of yourself. And how do you do that? Well, it's simple, but not easy. First, take some time for yourself. Reflect on what you need to feel good. It could be time alone, a trip, a change of routine, anything to reconnect with your inner self. Secondly, surround yourself with people who love and support you. True friendships are an inexhaustible source of positive energy. And thirdly, practice self-care. This includes both the physical and the emotional. Allow yourself to do things that give you pleasure, take care of yourself, pamper yourself. When you feel good about yourself, the way you approach problems changes completely. Set your limits now. One of the most important parts of this whole process, setting your limits. Because look, if you don't set clear boundaries, the other person will continue to treat you as an option, and then you'll be trapped in a vicious cycle that only hurts you more. Setting limits is an act of self-respect. If the other person isn't prioritizing you, you need to do it for yourself. And how does this work in practice? It's simple. You need to know how far you're willing to go and to what extent you accept certain attitudes. If the other person always leaves you in the background, start being firmer in your actions. It's not about giving them an ultimatum, but about making it clear that you won't accept being treated as a plan B. For example, if your partner keeps canceling appointments with you, start making your own plans. Stop waiting for your partner to fit you into their schedule and live your own life. This doesn't mean that you're going to ignore the person, but that you're no longer going to live at the mercy of what the other person decides. Setting limits also means having difficult conversations and, if necessary, even considering taking a break from the relationship. Because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to ensure that you're being respected and valued. One thing you can't ignore is how essential it is to have a support network during this process. When you realize that you're no longer a priority, it's very common to feel alone. But believe me, you don't have to go through this without support. Friends, family, and people who really care about you are essential to help you deal with this difficult time. Talking to people you trust eases the emotional burden. Saying out loud what you're feeling often gives you clarity about what's going on. What's more, friends and family can give you a perspective that you, caught up in the whirlwind of emotions, may not be seeing. What's more, these people can remind you of your value. Because when you're in a relationship where you're no longer a priority, you start to doubt your own worth. So surrounding yourself with people who love and support you will help you remember that you deserve to be treated with care, respect, and attention. The courage to move on. And last but not least comes the hardest part. Having the courage to move on if necessary. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we talk, no matter how hard we try, the truth is that the relationship will never be the same again. And in that case, you need to have the courage to make a decision. Moving on doesn't mean you failed. Quite the opposite. It means that you were strong enough to recognize that you deserve better. It means you had the courage to put yourself first, even if it hurts. Because at the end of the day, nothing hurts more than being stuck in a relationship where you're not the priority. Whether it's ending the relationship, taking a breather, or simply redefining the rules of the relationship, moving on is always an act of courage. And courage, my friend, is what you will need from now on. But be sure of one thing. When you choose to value yourself, the universe begins to conspire in your favor. So, did you like the video? If these signs inside a relationship are something you know really happens, don't forget to leave your like and share it with anyone you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell to receive all notifications and join our channel.